I'm not interested in fine and I'm not interested in generic, and I respect that those places need to exist, but it certainly doesn't appeal to me, and I don't think it would appeal really to many people going into hospitality, because there are easier ways to live than hospitality. You have to know why you're doing it.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. As we've seen during the series, the pandemic has given everyone a story to tell. Some good, some bad, some hopeful, some devastating. Amongst the heartbreak, it's given some the opportunity to restructure their business or start something new. It's also given rise to a greater sense of community. Chrissy Flanagan is the founder of Dully Locals and the owner of the sausage factory Sausage Queen Brewing, and is affably known as Sydney's Sausage Queen. Chrissy, how are you?
I am super. Thank you for having me.
That's quite a name to be known for. Can you tell us a bit about the history about that?
Yes, so when I first started making sausages, I found out that the meat industry's sausage making competition was called, and remains called, Sausage King competition. And I thought, oh, fuck that. It's a bit obnoxious, isn't it? So I just thought, yeah, I might just make a bit of a point about that and style myself as a sausage queen. And I thought it was, hilarious. And then, but I also have sort of a gift where I'm deaf to double entendre, which has obviously made the last few years deeply amusing for everyone else. And it just rolls right off me because I don't hear it. So everyone has a really good time at my expense / with me, and everyone's happy. So yes, I have until recently been in trademark dispute with Melbourne Sausage Queen, but we have come to an agreement.
Oh, wow.
So we can recognise each other as queens of the north and south.
Well, you've had a pretty non-typical pandemic experience for a hospitality professional, because you do have hospitality businesses, but you also work in the government. Can you tell us what it was like for you at the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, when it was coming, sort of during February and then late February, early to mid March, there was something pretty interesting happening because we're a really small place at the sausage factory, and our normal world capacity, in inverted commas, is 35. So
Wow.
it's super intimate. Wait until you hear how much more intimate it is now. So we had a little bit of a boom, as much as 35 people can be a boom, because there was a bit of a move away from the bigger venues and the CBDs early on. And I noticed people were kind of starting to stick to their neighbourhood places a little bit more. So right up until about a week before the restaurants were actually closed by the government, we were packed, and packed also with regulars who were starting to become hyper regular. So we were having people there sort of every week, and I think a few elements of that, it was that people wanted that kind of trust, and the intimacy of knowing exactly who was running the place that they were going to, but also something sort of safe and familiar. So that was really interesting. But then in that last week, we went from being full the weekend before restaurants were shut down, and then starting that Wednesday, Thursday, it was just an absolute desert. And we went, okay, this is coming. Let's be responsible. And we said early in the week that Friday was going to be our last night until whenever, and shut down. And then on the Sunday, the restaurants were officially closed. So it was a bit of a weird lead-in, but we immediately pivoted to new things because it felt like it was essential, really.
You're kind of an archetypal example of passion projects. You do many things, even though you'd also have a job. What's it been like with the pandemic landing, and and all of those passion projects that you have, how did you feel about them?
Yeah, it's in some ways it's caused a lot of people to do a bit of a stock take. And my philosophy of the hospitality industry is that it's been shitty for like a long time, and I think a lot of restaurants have been marginal for years. And you see incredible businesses that have, amazing product and very high profile chefs. Acme is always the first that comes to mind. Close, then you go, fuck. If Acme is closed, how is anywhere still open? If somewhere with like all the critical regard and closes, so that can be a bit confronting. And I think that we as a hospitality industry have to now go, okay, this is an opportunity. Yes, this is incredibly awful, but this is an opportunity for us to reset our relationship with the dining public. And we need to, while people are paying attention to whether our businesses are viable or not, and that's only going to be like a heartbeat of time, we need to work out a model that is more stable, that works more for us on an ongoing basis. Yes, during the pandemic, but also how do we look ahead to how that's going to grow and change when we're allowed to have more people back. And I don't think the answer is to just go, all right, it's all over now, back to everything, because that wasn't working for the industry, and certainly it wasn't working for the sausage factory. So what we've done when we reopened, we went, okay, we were open 5 nights a week. Dulwich Hill is very much an area still in transition. It's incredibly hot. Do not get me wrong. And it's an amazing. I'm just always hyping Dulwich Hill, but that's just me. Dulwich Hill is amazing, but we don't have a lot of dinner venues. We need more to be forming sort of a cluster and a destination precinct feeling. So really, Friday and Saturday nights are always strong. Wednesday, Thursday, Sundays, up and down. So we just went, you know what? We're just going to open Friday and Saturdays. And we've got a lot of other stuff going on. At that time, we were still manufacturing as Chrissy's Cuts. So we had sausages going out to 50 supermarkets every week. And we were ramping up Sausage Queen Brewing, our beer manufacturing. So we went, let's just do the 2 nights. And it means that we can run everything ourselves and really take back kind of control of the space and the venue and the feeling of being in there. So, and now we've gone well, this is fantastic. And the business model works better than it ever has.
Wow.
Which is very confronting. But as my accountant likes to say, scale isn't a virtue in itself. It's only it's margin. Margin is what makes you a profitable business or not a profitable business. And just doing more of something doesn't mean that people are going to buy that more that you put out. So, and we've also done things like sittings, and everything is on a set menu. So previously, we were those people who wanted to be super chill, and if you wanted to come and have a glass of wine and a sausage sanger and sit there for 4 hours, we were no worries. And now we're just doesn't work for anyone. So this is the new model. We do a $35 per person set menu, and we do bottomless booze for $32, and people come for 2 hours, and they have the time of their fucking lives, and then they go home, and they're happy, we're happy. No one is served by anyone other than me, so they have a very intense sausage queen experience as well, for good or bad. And then my partner Jim is running the kitchen, and he comes out and tells them about all the sausages. So it's very much an extension of our living room, and that is something we couldn't do 5 nights a week, but we can do it 2 nights a week for hopefully the rest of our lives. So this is a model that works for us, and we'll carry it into the future, even though it doesn't make sense for other places. It makes sense for us, and everyone has to take control of their own model.
You did mention about models during COVID and then whether or not they would work beyond and the need for new restaurant models. Do you think that this model that you have will stay tight post COVID?
I think it will. It's also really focused the people who come because we have, yeah, and still, as it was becoming right before COVID, and it's a very intense crowd, like people who are coming fortnightly, sort of even on average, there'd be 10 couples, I'd say, who come on a fortnightly basis and just bring different friends. And one of my favorite things the other night, one of our regular architects, I heard telling her friends that this is her place. And nothing could make me happier than people feeling a sense of ownership over something that you love and have put all your energy and time into making, to refining. So yeah, so I think that's going to work because we don't need a million people to get it and enjoy it and think it's a good idea. We just need a small crowd and for them to tell a few of their friends. And then, we're full. So at the moment, we're doing sort of about 12 to 16 people in each 2 hour sitting. And yeah, that's the law. So, but that works for us, and we can handle it.
How did it all start with sausages?
Oh, so I was consulting, doing what I do for the government now, which is sort of communications and engagement consulting. So I help the government explain their ideas and infrastructure and programs and things. So I was doing that on a consultant basis, having just left the public service, and I was sort of sometimes you're busy, sometimes it's quiet, but I was also desperately, desperately lonely because I was working from home and I would go to the local supermarket and I was just best friends with everyone who worked there because those were the only people I saw in the day other than my partner. So I was very much in need of something to give myself just a little bit more purpose and fell into having absolutely no food background, did not grow up in a food family. My partner Jim is a beautiful cook and his family is very food oriented, but I'd never really been interested before Jim, but had become then interested in the produce, not so much cooking, but the produce. So started making cheese and curing hams in the shower and fermenting, all that sort of thing, all that's cottage core thing that people go through. And eventually made sausages, and we had a party and cooked them at a party. And I thought, why do these sausages, why are they just unrecognizable from sort of Australian sausages that you normally get in supermarkets? And I realized that it was the absence of lips, eyeballs, assholes, and literally, and the artificial preservatives and all the fillers, and that sausages don't have just a generic sausage taste. They can and should, I would argue, taste like the things they're made from. And they're just an amazing vehicle for flavour in exactly the same way that beer is. There shouldn't just be a beer taste. There isn't a beer taste. Beer should taste like 1,000 things, and sausages should taste like 1,000 things. So, and then I went, oh yeah, it's this pork shoulder I'm using. And then I think one of the first sausages we did for that party was a pork bacon maple. And that became the first sausage that we did in supermarkets and also for beer festivals, such that I cannot eat it anymore because I spent too many hours smelling like a pork bacon maple sausage and being chased by dogs and having my ankles licked by dogs in the street because I smelled like pork bacon and maple. So yes, that was basically the revelation. I went, oh, there's got to be a market for sausages made from food. Like, Australians love sausages, but you can't think for a second about what is in them or it will be disgusting. Surely there is a market for a not disgusting sausage. And and well, so that was kind of the rationale part of it. But then personally, I just needed to build something. And it gave me, like, it's completely obviously transformed my life, and is, I think, the single most important decision I've made in my whole life, to start a ridiculous sausage business completely out of my depth. Yeah, it's been very, very transformative.
Well, you just said it was the most important decision of your life that you've made. But during the series, I noticed on Instagram that you had all sorts of advice, and you were posting videos about starting a business now, that something you'd always wanted to do. And you always also talked about running a business while working in another job, and the benefits of that. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of starting a business as just a way to kind of take control of your life, because it's terribly fulfilling to build something from scratch. And I've not encountered, in having kind of a job and a traditional sort of career, the same satisfaction. Like, yes, it's great to, like, get a job and then, you do well in your job, but it's not as kind of, life on the line, adrenaline, live and die by, are people buying your product that you have made every decision that has gone into it, and if it fails, it's you, and if it succeeds, it's you. At which point I should acknowledge that Jim is also extremely instrumental. But it's just exhilarating. But what I like about combining starting a business, and especially your first business, with having a job, is you've got all the safety net of, an income, and it's fiendishly hard to start a business, particularly a business that has a physical product, uh, just with any amount of money, really, because there's a lot of things that cost a lot of money before you get a product that you can then sell to people. And even then, you have to have stock of that product. You have to have somewhere that you can legally store it, and you have to distribute it. And in a food business, that is very, very expensive, and things, are constantly aging out. It's bad enough if you've got a shelf stable product, but in a food business, that's just very high risk. So if you have a job as well, then you have that buffer of, it's hard to fuck up so badly that you're just out of business. But without that, I don't know how people do it unless they have a background, unless you've had a job working in the industry doing these things, and you know how all the system works. But if you're coming to it as a rank amateur, as I did, completely new industry, all the regulation completely new to you, and the production, everything new, then having just that financial buffer is amazing. But I also, and strongly of a belief that it makes you better at your job as well. Like, I had a lot of, just in the end, untapped energy that I needed to channel somewhere. Back like 15 years ago, I was a political staffer, which worked for me because I worked, from 4 a.m. until whenever the phone stopped ringing, and sometimes during the night, because someone had been hit by a train, I would be called. So, like, a very all-absorbing job. And when you then, like that, but that, you can't do that sort of thing for life because it will burn you out. But then there's not enough pressure. I feel like I'm sounding extremely dysfunctional, but but, but I really
It's
was
normal for
confronted.
hospitality, I think.
That's the thing, yeah. If you're a hospitality person, you have to have, or it's not going to work. Just a ton of energy, and a real ambition to create something incredible. Like, if you're just a bit half-assed about hospitality, it's just not going to work, because people can feel half-assedness. Like, yes, there are places that are completely, just fine and generic and down the road, and they work because it's just like, it's fine and people are only looking for fine. But I'm not interested in fine, and I'm not interested in generic. And I respect that those places need to exist, but it certainly doesn't appeal to me, and I don't think it would appeal really to many people going into hospitality, because there are easier ways to live than hospitality. You have to know why you're doing it.
You're very proud of Dulwich Hill, and you spoke of it only moments ago, but it drove you to start Dully Locals. Can you tell us about what that was originally and how the pandemic has affected it?
Yeah, so I started it. It's been kind of at the back of my mind since we moved to Dulwich Hill. Um, what about 4 years ago? Because Dulwich Hill has a really emerging and slowly booming artisan producer scene that I'm very proud of, and I'm a huge advocate just of telling people what is in Dulwich Hill, and anyone who comes in the sausage factory hears about kombucha down the road and baked by Kieran around the corner and drunken sailor jams, and I'm very excited about telling people the incredible things that are in the neighborhood. So I had a rule that I wasn't going to start any more organizations, but then which is a solid rule. I liked that rule, but it got out of control. So the council asked me if I would curate a stage at Dulwich Hill Fair last year, and I went, well, I'm probably going to have to actually start Dully Locals, because, what's the point of just doing a one-day thing? Let's create an entire sort of local movement around it and use it to promote local businesses. So then, yeah, set up Dully Locals and started promoting local businesses. And so we had the fair, and we had incredible presentations. And Rosa from the Tamaleria brought a Mexican band to her presentation. Like, it was incredible, and we really overscoped the entire day. But that's how we all like to do things. And then after that, I went, okay. There's a lot of other stuff going. I'll just kind of keep Dully Locals ticking over for a bit while I work out exactly what I want to do with it on an ongoing basis. And was talking to council about potentially doing some other stuff in the future, but it was just kind of sitting there. And then early January, everything became a bit sort of too much with having 5 businesses and a job, and I had a little, no, I shouldn't diminish, I had an emotional breakdown, which was my first, remarkably, when you think about the stupid decisions I make, and had a bit of a reassessment and went, okay, well, what's really important in all the things? Clearly I need to cut out some of these things. And at that time I was also making a podcast, which I was very much enjoying and learning all those technical things, and doing, like, I was knitting large swathes of knitting, and then nail gunning it to telegraph poles around Dulwich Hill. And I went, okay, some of these things are going to go. And Dulwich Hill, Dully Locals was like on the very much at risk list. But council called me like really right then and said, oh, I think we should do some stuff and give you some grants, and what do you want to do and what can we fund? I went, oh, okay. You made it, Dully Locals. And then not too long after that, so mid-March then, when I was talking to councils about what we would do, maybe a newsletter with some grant money or some other, like an incubator, and things started to hit, places closing down, and a lot of those amazing artisan producers in Dulwich Hill, they don't have, or didn't have at the time, any retail distribution at all. It was all wholesale. So I went, oh, you're fucked immediately. Like, they went from having a booming business to nothing the next week, because when the restaurant shut, all of their customers just went away. So, and also in the last few days that the sausage factory was open, people were saying to me, you have to work out how we can still get your product. We're really worried about how we're going to support local businesses if we can't leave our house. How can we keep you alive? And if you're not open, what can we do? What are we going to do? What's going to happen to the business community? And people really, really quickly got that their business community was part of their community, and that their community was their responsibility. And I found that incredibly heartening. So I sort of thought, well, this is my community as well. I live 30 seconds from the sausage factory. So I think it's important to be able to run to your restaurant. That's my principle of where we can rent is running distance. And I'm not fit, so that can't be far. So I thought, okay, something's going to have to happen. And I thought, oh, look, I've already got this very convenient not-for-profit structure in Dully Locals. Let's turn that into an e-commerce site. So after I shut the restaurant, I then spent the next 4 days emailing every producer in Dulwich Hill and saying, okay, in a week, we're going to have an e-commerce platform live. Drop me off samples of your products. And I built the website. We had a photo shoot. And then,
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty, I do like a challenge. And I think it was the Wednesday, we launched the Dully Locals website after having closed on the Friday. And we did $5,000 of sales in the first 5 days, and then 20,000 in the first 2 months. And it's still, clicking along. Yeah, so I was from a standing start, I was pretty proud of that. But it was because there was such a keen appetite for that. People with jobs, and I was one of those people with jobs, that they felt were secure, were like, well, what am I going to do to support these businesses? And I ran into a senior public servant in the street, and he said he and his wife and their 3 kids were having 3 takeaway meals from Dulwich Hill businesses a day because they were just like, how can we ram money into the business? Because he and his wife were both on very good incomes, and they were like, it is our job to spend as much money as possible immediately where we live. So yeah, I think that's what I attribute to the success of Dully Locals. Everyone just being very, very ripe for it. So that kind of ticked over, and then when things started to reopen, and I had this conversation with Claire at Bloodwood, because Bloodwood takeaway as well was absolutely huge, and people were kind of going like, okay, well, this is fine, we'll do both. Like, we'll continue to do like the Dully Locals and the home delivery, and we'll have this other income stream of the like sales in person. But there was a very stark just tick over. People went like, oh, restaurants are open now, everyone's fine. There's like, I am under no further obligation to proactively support local businesses. So I think it has definitely gone off the boil a little bit, and people have really noticed it. But it's raised awareness. It's a matter of how much people continue to act on that. If they're going to, and particularly thinking of office workers, if they're going to be in their community 24 hours a day, purely because people work at home now and for whatever period of time they're going to be, there's also now just amenity to getting lunch down the road. You're not going to go into a CBD to get lunch, unfortunately, for the businesses that are in the CBD. So if you live in a highly residential area, then you're being supported now, not through a sense of responsibility necessarily, but like that's where the food is. So yeah, things are just shifting week by week, really. It's a fascinating study, and I don't know where we'll be at Christmas, but we'll just keep pivoting.
You certainly love a challenge, but how have you felt during this period?
I mean, manic, obviously, but it's so immediate. Like it really focuses the mind, because like action can't kind of wait. So with starting Dully Locals, that's why I ramped that website up so quickly, because people were going to be having trouble paying their rent the next week, and some people were having product shipped back to them, so they weren't even going to have the invoices that they had out being paid, and that product was just going to expire. So something had to happen extremely suddenly, and there wasn't a sense that we could kind of wait for the government and everyone's landlords to sort it out for us, that it was on us to make our own solutions. So that had to happen quickly. But I've largely felt I mean, guilt at having a job, because it's very confronting to be part of the hospitality industry and see what difficult decisions people are having to make. And we were sort of lucky in some ways with staff in that we were in a transition period with staff, so we didn't have to make those really awful decisions of letting go any long-term staff. And we managed to keep our one long-term staff member who's on a visa, so had no other options other than leaving the country. He became our Dully Locals delivery driver then. And yeah, so we was kind of spared a lot of the grief that a lot of the industry had to experience, because we had this kind of safety net. Although, of course, we do have to work for those jobs, which is an awful lot of time and energy as well. But anyway, we had circumstances where we had a backup. But then in that space of not having the restaurant open, 5 nights a week, there was more time to think about, well, what is working, what isn't working, and we decided that the sausages in supermarkets, Chrissy's Cuts, wasn't scaling the way we thought it had, and it had 4 years, and we were going to wrap that up. So went through a process of negotiating with a few companies to sell the brand that ultimately fell through, and then I think about about a month ago now, we announced we were going to stop making Chrissy's Cuts, and which was very hard and confronting, because it was it was the first baby, and everything else has sort of come out of that. The sausage factory came out of Chrissy's Cuts, and then Sausage Queen Brewing came out of the sausage factory, and it felt very tied up in kind of the central identity of everything. And this whole knot couldn't be unpicked, and no one piece could be taken out. But I worked out, the thing that I am the most excited about is the bar and the beer. So those, I need to put my energy into those things. So it's been a relief in some ways to be sort of forced into making difficult decisions. And it's been a relief to make difficult decisions about the sausage factory, because it didn't feel like it was entirely ours anymore, because it just got a bit, away from us in the way when things kind of roll on and everything's fine for a few years. You're not completely revisiting all the time, is this working? Is it what we want it to be? But when something stops, you go, well, are we going to put all of it back? So it's a very strange time, and I don't exactly know how I feel, but I think I'm making good decisions, and that's more important than feeling a particular way to me.
As someone that communicates on behalf of the government and works in hospitality, how do you see the roadmap moving forward for the hospitality sector?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, and I'm on Inner West Council's economic recovery task force as well, which has local business people from all sectors talking about this exact problem. And I think that it's good. This gives the government a window that, and speaking from personal opinion, and I'm not in any way a decision maker. I believe that the government is going to embrace this opportunity to improve life for both residents and businesses, because there are opportunities to try things, because people are more open to change when change is happening anyway. So things like closing down streets at particular times to have outdoor seating, that is fantastic anytime, but that would be a very hard sell in normal times, because a lot of very outspoken people are very resistant to change. And So, but you can try things because things can very clearly be justified. Now you go, well, you don't want those businesses to close, do you? No. So we're just going to give this a shot, okay? And if it works, that's fantastic. If it doesn't work, that's totally fine. But I think we've seen a lot of things like the government letting restaurants sell their alcohol under a restaurant license to take away and even do delivery. Like, there has not been a spike in one punch injuries since that has happened. People aren't like drinking and drunk on the streets. It's fine. And I personally think it would be fantastic if things like that continued. And I say that as someone who has a wholesale producer's license now, so that means there's more competition for me in other restaurants being able to do that. But I think competition is how you get, the best result for everyone, and welcome competition. So anything that can be done to give businesses more opportunity, faster planning approval so that it's easier to start a business. There are a lot of opportunities, and I believe the wheels are turning such that business and the community will be in a better position in the midterm for as regards sort of their local businesses.
Well, Chrissy, you are known as the Sydney Sausage Queen, but perhaps you should be known as the Queen of Dully from now on. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds, and please keep in touch, and love to hear what happens moving forward as we get out of COVID.
Thank you. I'd love to see you. This has been very fun.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.